I guess we should get to something we've been wanting to talk about, you and I, on the show. It's something we've mentioned previously. You and I talk quite a bit about consciousness, exploring that weird mystery of existence, what consciousness is, and mention several different thinkers and writers who've explored this, and we've gotten into the work of Philip K. Dick and his ideas about alternate realities, and which have been popularized more in recent years through the making of some of his stories into movies. So we've talked about his work and several other people, and one of the people we often seem to refer back to is Terence McKenna, and he just did so much work to open our minds and other people we know to possibilities of what's going on, to that kind of opening us up to realize that many things that we took for granted were just that, things we were taking for granted. They were really not based on solid reality. And so McKenna was one of the people who really popularized the notion of psychedelics, particularly tryptamine hallucinogens, psilocybin mushrooms, and DMT and others, as tools for expanding our awareness. And he, but the thing that really fascinated both of us, I think, about McKenna was his speculations, things that he would come up with that he sometimes just said just came to him, or were based on these this intelligence that seems to be part of the tryptamine realm. These speculations he came up with about reality, about how it was all put together. And one of these things that I had gotten wind of years back and had sort of understood it and mentioned it because I loved the phrase. It sounded so cool, and that was the Fractal Soliton of Improbability. And I know, Smiles, you liked this as well, but haven't quite heard about it as much, and so recently have done some research on it and gotten a better understanding of it. So those of you listeners who've heard us say that and thought, wow, yeah, that's bizarre, but really, what is it? We're going to try to break that down a little more today. So, Smiles, what has been your understanding over the last few weeks as far as looking into this a little more that you didn't understand before?
Well, yeah, you turned me on to this years ago by sending me through snail mail a cassette tape of an old Terence McKenna lecture, and I think it was so you or somebody had titled it Roman Chariots on the Moon, and I've been looking for that again, but I haven't been able to find it yet. But about a month or so ago, I came across a link at a blog called Dream Flash. I believe it's by a guy over in London, and he had gone to the trouble of transcribing a particular lecture of McKenna's that he found in this wonderful collection of archived lectures of McKenna with a bunch of other wonderful people. And in this audio, this is the only other reference I'd ever come across to this idea of the fractal soliton of improbability that McKenna was talking about. And in fact, it actually has resonance with several of his other ideas, this idea of the time wave, the idea of the ingression of novelty leading towards some omega point in the late, December 2012 region, and it also connected to his ideas about UFOs and whatnot. And having, devoured as much of his material as I could, from his published books to these wonderful lectures that he did all the time across the planet, I really didn't come across this idea very much, because it's a very specific idea, and that idea is, in a nutshell, that there is this type of physics entity in the universe called a soliton of improbability, and he's described it both as a wave and a particle. And in its wave aspect, it's a wave that has one interval. It is just like one cycle. It only happens once. And he Apparently he was meditating in his usual way, which I assume either means he was high on pot or psilocybin, or maybe he was just meditating straight. I don't know, but he came up with this idea. It came to him as if it was delivered by this other realm. You know, he's always posited these elf-infested spaces that he says that, you know, the psychedelic research that he's done seems to grant access to, and that many other researchers seem to support this contention that the Aboriginal cultures of our planet have always been in contact with this other realm, and that there seem to be entities in this other realm that communicate with us. Well, he says that this other realm communicated with him, but this time it told him something different in a very short amount of time. And that different thing that what he was told was that this fractal Soliton of Improbability hit our planet way back, and he says you can shift this either way, to either the Immaculate Conception or the Resurrection. And either way, the idea is simply that the birth of Christ was this most improbable event in our reality, induced by our planets encountering this Soliton of Improbability, and that it instantly created two different versions of our planet. And he, of course, likens the idea behind this to, I think it's Maxwell Wheeler, the physicist, who posited that with every decision that's made, there are two, universes created. In other words, the multi-worlds interpretation, where there are an infinite number of possible realities, each based upon the decisions that we make, and also just the different probabilities that certain actions could lead down. And he says that this created two different realities, and one in which Christ was born, one in which Christ was not born. And basically that obviously we're in the one that he was born into, in which what he describes as the demiurge conspired to manifest itself in our reality, and that the toppling of Roman civilization, such as it was, by this myth of Jesus and the resurrection, retarded our technological growth, but not so much our technology, but retarded our growth in the directions that it would have gone had Christ never existed. And that basically Hypatia wouldn't have been murdered, stoned to death, and that we would have had calculus much, much more early in our history, and that basically in this other reality they progressed without the repressions of the Christian epoch, and that led them to earlier to being seafaring, led them to meeting the Mayans, resulted in a global Greco-Roman Mayan cybernetic culture that encompassed a knowledge of the power and use of psychedelic plants and the exploration of consciousness, and that at some point their exploration of consciousness brought them into an awareness of our reality, their shadow reality, the bifurcated reality that was created when the Soliton of Improbability wrenched our world into these two different time streams. And this leads to the idea of, he was, of course, this is a vision of his that he was experiencing in a very short amount of time, in which he, to my knowledge, only spoke or wrote about a handful of times. It didn't, I don't think, ever make it into any official book of his that I'm aware. And in some ways it's complementary, and in some ways it contradicts his other ideas about 2012 and UFOs. But
right.
I don't think it's mutually exclusive. But anyway, he posits that at some point they realized that this separate time stream was created, the separate planet where we are was created, and that they have started a program of trying to contact us, and that is in fact part of the UFO phenomenon. But that also around our year 1908, 1906, whenever it was that the Tunguska blast occurred, that in fact was them testing their hypothesis that they had discovered nuclear atomic bomb technology much earlier than we had, but didn't do anything with it because of their culture being so radically different, and that they tested the hypothesis that if they detonated a bomb in their reality, it would have effects in our reality. And supposedly by monitoring the dreams of Siberian shamans, they were able to discern that, yes, in fact, these hundreds of acres or however much square miles of